Easy, Echo. What are you trying to tell me? Gabe Lawson's voice softened into the crisp Idaho air as the 5-year-old German shepherd stiffened beside him. The wind here had a bite he'd come to welcome, threading through pines and sweeping the wide, open flats like a cold, familiar hand. Gabe had chased quiet all his life and finally caught a piece of it in this remote corner of the Panhandle. Tall, a little lean, with that wiry strength the Army carves into a man, he wore the years plainly. Creases at the eyes that still somehow held warmth, short brown hair salted at the temples, an old brown leather jacket over a gray and navy check shirt, worn denim tucked into beat-up work boots. Echo, gray and white coated, bright-eyed, and steady, moved like a silent sentinel at his side, a partner Gabe trusted like breath. 6 months of looking had ended with a too-good-to-be-true listing. A rough plot a long drive from the nearest town, a speck of land wrapped in grass and timber, a fast, faceless sale completed by email and a wire. No survey, no real notes. Exactly what he wanted. He had already pegged a rise for a small cabin with a deep porch, somewhere to sit with Echo and watch winter take the fields, and that picture felt close enough to touch. Then the brush parted and wrecked the silence. Half swallowed by scrub, a shed crouched behind the thicket, silvered planks split with age, paint hanging in tatters. It wasn't on any listing he'd read. Echo's low growl rolled up from his chest, rare and sober, hackles lifting as he stepped in front of Gabe. The dog's bark cracked the quiet and sharpened fast, clawing at the door, whining like he was trying to pull a ghost into daylight. What had him so fixed? Gabe laid a palm on Echo's back, then turned on his heel for the truck, fingers finding the cold handles of a pair of bolt cutters in the toolbox. Quick aside before we crack this open, tap subscribe and tell us what city you're watching from and the local time. Now, back to it. The padlock was a stubborn antique, but the cutters bit through and popped it free. Gabe eased the door, hinges groaned. Dust, old air, and a century of stillness pushed past him as he stepped inside, with Echo shadowing his boots. He swept a pocket flashlight through the dingy dark. Sunlight laced in through seams in the boards, catching a slow storm of dust. This wasn't storage, it was a time capsule. Along one wall, rusted tools grinned with toothless iron, a worn plow blade slumped in a corner. A cracked oil lamp and empty glass bottles rested on a bench like they'd been set down yesterday. A broken chair, a stack of burlap sacks, a ragged horse blanket, relics of hands that once worked and lost this place. Gabe pictured a rancher out here, a life of hard seasons and simple tools, the kind of story land remembers even when people don't. Echo didn't care for the general past. He moved with surgical intent, nose to floor, tail low, sliding between shadows with a focus that made Gabe step back and watch. The dog trailed to a dim corner and nosed a heap of stained canvas tarps, let out a soft whine, then flicked a look at Gabe that said here. Gabe knelt. The tarp, stiff with grime and weight, fought him. He peeled it back and found 3 wooden crates stacked crookedly beneath. Old, stained, sealed by time. Echo bumped the top crate and sat, eyes bright, waiting. Gabe pried the slats free, wood splintering with a dry crack. A rush of old paper and dust rose up with something deeper. Forgotten rooms in someone else's memory. Inside, sepia photographs of stern faces and stiff collars. Letters with curling, fragile script, scraps of fabric and small decorative odds and ends. Echo nudged Gabe's hand, insistent. Gabe reached deeper and felt a thick roll of paper. He unfurled it carefully, and recognition hit like a cord from a life he'd tried to fold away. A blueprint. Before he wore a uniform, he'd been a civil engineer. The tidy lines and measured notes sang in a language his bones still spoke. Bottom right corner, where a name should sit, was not a signature but a symbol. The initials are S inside an inverted triangle, drawn bold and sure. Why did that mark feel like it belonged to him? Echo pushed his nose along the corner, as if pointing. Gabe stared at the emblem, a nagging familiarity scratching at his mind. The next morning, intent replacing the simple plan to hammer posts and plot a porch, Gabe drove the long miles into town. The main street ran with brick storefronts and old signs, a slice of small-town America still awake. He stepped in the public library, stone and glass, warm with the smell of paper and polish, and told the silver-haired librarian what he needed. She nodded toward the historical room and left him to the hum of past lives. For days, he became part of the furniture, spooling microfilm, reading land records and newspapers, letting old classifieds flicker by, flipping ledgers, tracing names and parcels, hunting those initials are S and that strange triangle through decades of ink. Every hour, he'd step outside to walk Echo and refill his water bowl, then return to the maze. But the more he combed, the less he found. No S tied to his land. No triangle. No clear lead. The feeling of chasing smoke pressed in, familiar in a way he wished it wasn't. He'd been working this like a solo mission, and all it got him was silence. So he went across the street to the newspaper office, clatter of keyboards, smell of ink, and wrote a classified to run 2 weeks, seeking any history on land near Birch Ridge. Found old shed with documents. Looking for original owner, possibly linked to the initials RS. Any information appreciated. It didn't carry drama, but as he handed it over, something shifted. He wasn't just clearing ground for a house now. He was opening the door to a shared story. Would anyone answer a stranger's call? For the next 2 weeks, he checked each morning paper, hammering away at small chores on the property by day and living with that quiet anticipation by night. Then, one evening when the skillet hissed on the stove, his phone lit with an unknown number. Mr. Lawson? The voice was warm, mountain slow. Name's Haskell. Used to keep up the local history. I read your ad, and I think I know that patch of land. They met the next morning at a little cafe on the corner, sun catching the cups on the tables. Mr. Haskell was already there, white hair and a thoughtful smile, kneeling to greet Echo with a biscuit before nodding to Gabe. They ordered coffee. Gabe unrolled the blueprint. The old man slid on wire-framed glasses and studied the lines. Beautiful work, he murmured, tracing a fingertip along the annotations. Too elaborate for a basic homestead. Then he began his tale. That acreage was Whitaker ground once, Haskell said. 19th century. Came west, built big, gave plenty. Thomas Whitaker led him. Quiet folks, but the backbone of the valley. He reached into a worn satchel and put a few faded family portraits on the table. Formal faces, dark clothes, the kind of images towns tuck away in albums. Then nothing. 1 year they're everywhere. Next they're gone. Paper trail breaks. The state took the land, folks forgot. It was the hinge Gabe needed and yet not enough. He tapped the blueprint's mark. Ever seen this symbol? Haskell turned the paper, searching, then frowned gently. No, son. I'd remember. Disappointment flickered through Gabe. Echo sighed under the table, as if he felt it too. They shook hands, promised updates. As the sun dropped behind the hills, Gabe and Echo rolled back to the shed. If the town couldn't name our S, the wood and dust might. This time his search wasn't drifting nostalgia. He ran his hands along every seam, eyes testing each board. Echo ghosted across the floor, nose mapping scents that had slept for a century. At the back, the same corner where the crates had sat, Echo stopped. Not the floor this time. The wall. A soft whine, then paws scratching. Gabe rapped his knuckles and heard it. Hollow. He pressed at a hairline gap. A catch clicked, and a slim panel swung inward, perfectly disguised. Echo nudged him on. Inside, Gabe's fingers met cold metal. He drew out a small, ornate box. Rust laced across its seams, a single delicate lock holding it shut. A careful twist with pliers. He didn't want to ruin it, and the lid breathed open. Velvet lining lay collapsed to dust over two treasures, a bundle of ribbon-tied letters and a small leather-bound diary. A tiny, beautifully cut key rested beside them like a whisper. On the journal's first page, a name bloomed in careful ink: Eleanor Whitaker. Gabe's pulse kicked. He began to read. Back at his kitchen table that night, pages spread with care, Gabe sank into Eleanor's voice. The early entries were light, observations of her family, life on the Whitaker acreage, a young woman's eye for detail. But the tone deepened, bodies of water running under her words, references to a man she loved and could not openly name, glimpses of meetings at twilight, a voice that rose when she spoke of him and sank as she tucked his existence behind metaphors. She only called him by his initials, RS, the blueprint's initials. Echo lay at Gabe's feet, chin on paws, ears angling as though he could hear her through a wall of time. This wasn't a dusty puzzle anymore. It was a living, private love caught in ink. Still, much of it was veiled, phrases bent into poetry to hide a truth that might have cost them everything. Gabe needed help to read between those lines. By morning, he had a plan. He called the university and left a message for Dr. Marin Holt, a scholar whose papers on historical linguistics and regional history had surfaced again and again in his late-night searches. She returned the call within the hour, curious, measured, interested in a way that made Gabe believe he wasn't chasing smoke. Her office smelled like paper and old coffee, shelved to the ceiling with leather and cloth, sunlight puddling at her desk. She welcomed them both, set a water bowl for Echo, and turned the diary in her hands like a jeweler with a rare stone. "The voice is genuine," she said, reading a page aloud and then untangling its layers with clear enthusiasm. "She's hiding in plain sight, elegant and deliberate." They worked through several entries, Dr. Holt slowing at a line that snagged her attention. "Our final legacy, a future for the birds that will one day fly from our nest." Gabe frowned. "Birds?" Dr. Holt's eyes brightened. "A 19th century shorthand for children, descendants. Nest often means the family home or estate." She's not just talking about a life they wanted. She's pointing to a legacy. A few pages later, another line. "Our secret shall be laid to rest, a last gift for those who come after us." Dr. Holt leaned back. "I think she's signaling a hidden cache, a treasure intended for their bloodline. If it's a rumor I've never been able to nail down about Whitaker wealth that vanished when they did. What if it wasn't lost at all? If that were true, where had they hidden it?" Gabe carried the diary and blueprint back to the truck with a new charge in his veins. It was no longer just a story to honor. It was a map waiting to be read. But a few days later, the world reached in with cold hands. A thick envelope landed in his mailbox, summons and complaint. Plaintiff Colton Hale. Claiming to be a distant Whitaker heir, Hale asserted that the land and all contents located thereon were his by right, based on an old deed allegedly buried for generations. The legalese hit with a dull weight. Echo pressed against him, reading the change in Gabe's breath. He stared at the paper and felt that familiar heat rise. Not fear, resolve. He could walk away and leave this all, and watched history be twisted. Or he could stand. He called a local attorney, Elliot Crane, who listened without blinking as Gabe laid it all out. The shed, the crates, the symbol, the diary, the scholar's notes. "This won't be easy," Crane said, flipping through photos of the blueprint and Eleanor's pages. Claims like this can be murky, but evidence counts. Word of the filing migrated through town on the wind. The hardware store slipped him a discount. The coffee kiosk pressed a steaming cup into his hand on the house. A rancher down the road stopped him. "Heard about that Hale mess," the man said. "Don't worry, neighbor. That land needed someone to remember it." And still, generosity couldn't win a case. He needed one more piece, something that couldn't be argued around. Where could it be hiding? Gabe and Echo drove back to the shed, the lawsuit riding shotgun as a dare. He laid out every artifact on the floorboards and went through them again with a soldier's patience. Letters, photos, deed fragments he read, scanned, traced. Echo watched him, tail thumping once, twice. Gabe ran out of things to check and sat back, rubbing tired eyes. Echo stood, nose twitching. He padded to the crate Gabe thought he'd exhausted and nosed at the bottom slat, not the contents. Then a soft whine. Gabe pressed on the panel. It moved barely. He pried up a thin false bottom he'd missed the first time. A single folded parchment lay tucked beneath. Gabe unfolded it on the dusty floor. It was a hand-drawn property map, ink faded but precise, with creek lines, trees, and old fence runs marked in a neat hand. In the far corner of the acreage, deep in an overgrown thicket, a small X sat, and next to it, a sketch of a key that perfectly matched the ornate one from the hidden box. Echo nosed the page and looked up, eyes saying go. They set out at once, daylight bleeding toward evening. The undergrowth fought them, brambles snagging denim, deadfall forcing detours, but the map's landmarks held true. Echo led with his nose, turning when the wind changed, threading them through old timber until the thicket opened to a wild tangle of vines. Gabe pushed back foliage until he reached bare earth and set a small shovel to the ground. The dirt was stubborn and rocky, each scoop a small argument he refused to lose. The sun melted low. Doubt pricked, then his shovel rang against something solid with a clean, metallic clang. He dropped to his knees and dug by hand, freeing the edge of a heavy metal chest, its surface carved long ago with designs time had nearly erased. Echo bumped it with his nose, ears forward, tail still, a dog's version of grin. Gabe heaved it free and set it down. The key slid into the lock and turned with a tender click. The lid lifted, and a warm glow from the last light spilled across a bed of gold coins and antique jewelry. Beautiful, yes, but not the thing that tightened his throat. Nestled among them lay a sealed letter. The hand was the same fluent script he'd seen at the corner of the blueprint. R.S. He broke the seal and read. It was a message to descendants, of love kept in shadows, of a home sketched but never built, of a promise buried until it could be safe. And at the bottom, in that steady hand, Robert Sinclair. The tilt in Gabe's memory settled. The mark, the blueprint, the pull he couldn't explain, because this wasn't just a romantic stranger. The letter named Gabe's great-grandfather, part of a quiet, long-forgotten Sinclair branch, as the intended heir to the legacy. The proof was alive in his hands. What would that mean when he faced Hale in court? The hearing didn't play like a drama. No banging tables, no grandstanding, just a small courtroom, a judge with a clear gaze, and the slow ritual of presenting proof. Gabe sat next to Elliot Crane, the briefcase at his feet thick with documents that felt less like paper and more like voices finally allowed to speak. Hale's attorney went first, posture tight, trying to weave a claim out of hearsay and a hazy line of custody. Crane rose and told a story. He walked the judge through the shed, the crates, the blueprint marked with our S, the scholar's reading of Eleanor's private diary. Then he rested his hand on the final piece and laid Robert Sinclair's letter on the table for the court, the ink sharp even after a century. It didn't just prove a tie, it laid out intent, naming Gabe's branch of the Sinclair family as the recipient of a legacy Whitaker and Sinclair had meant to protect. Hale's counsel stared and blinked, the argument gone out of him. There was nothing left to push against. Within minutes, he announced his client was withdrawing the suit. Gabe exhaled, tension sliding off his shoulders in a quiet rush. Echo leaned against his leg, steady as ever. Relief wasn't the right word. It was steadier than that. After the paperwork and a dozen handshakes in town, Gabe drove back to the shed with a different mission. He cleaned and shored up the old bones, mended the places that time had pried loose, and arranged the artifacts with care. The diary opened to a page where Eleanor wrote of Robert with that clear, brave tenderness. The blueprint hung like a vow on the wall. He called it the Sinclair Whitaker Legacy Museum, and he and Echo kept its door. People came from all over the county, old-timers who remembered the rumors, kids wide-eyed, neighbors who had brought him coffee and nods during the fight. They stood, quiet, and listened to a story that had been buried right under their feet. With the legal storm settled and the past spoken for, Gabe turned to the future the way he'd always imagined it, by building something with his hands. He measured the slope where he'd seen a porch in his mind that first day, cut joists, set posts true. He carried pieces of Robert Sinclair's plan into the design. Not a reconstruction, but a nod. The sweep of the porch, the way the windows caught morning light, a line here and there that made the place feel like it belonged to both of them. Echo patrolled the perimeter as if he owned it, chasing squirrels with mock fury and then trotting back to watch Gabe set a beam. Evenings, the valley settled the way it only does out here, gold sinking into purple, timber silhouettes cut clean against the sky. One night, with the house almost complete, Gabe and Echo stood side by side on the new porch. Echo's gray and white coat held the last light. The dog looked up with that unblinking intelligence that had led them to everything. Gabe crouched and wrapped his arms around him, pressing his face into warm fur and letting gratitude wash over whatever hurt had lived there before this place. Echo had found the shed, demanded they look, pointed to clues they didn't know were there. Some partners speak. Some partners listen. Echo did both without a word. Gabe stepped back and looked at the home he'd built, the ground that had let him be useful again, the museum behind him that made him a steward and not just an owner. "Welcome home," he said, voice low but strong. Echo House. The name fit like a good boot, honest and earned. A house meant for quiet, for keeping, for remembering, and moving forward in equal measure. How many stories end where they started? Back on a porch, with the right company, and a sky that says tomorrow is yours. He learned that the truest treasure wasn't only the coins or the jewelry that winked in the dirt, beautiful as they were, but the proof that love can survive being hidden, and that loyalty can lead you through any thicket. The legacy he'd claimed wasn't carved in monuments. It lived in a diary's tender lines, in a signature that reached across a century, in neighbors who stepped close when a stranger needed a hand, and in a dog who refused to be ignored. Each morning he walked the property, museum key in one pocket, Echo trotting at his knee, and felt the steadiness he'd been chasing finally settle. He'd come looking for quiet and found purpose. He'd purchased a plot and inherited story. He'd tried to leave the past behind and learned the past wasn't finished with him, because it had something kind to give. Maybe that's what home really is. Not an address, but a promise kept to people you'll never meet and a vow to those who stand beside you now. And maybe, when you listen closely, the wind does more than bite. It whispers that you're right where you're supposed to be. If this journey spoke to you, give this video a like, subscribe to our channel for more true-hearted stories, and let us know in the comments what you felt and what you'd love to hear next.